Hello, and welcome to Blades and Banners, a Tales of the Valiant actual play set in the Eberron campaign world. This is the first episode of our Q&A show, which we're calling The Ship's Log.
Very clever. Well done.
Yes. Well, in the last one, I confused everyone into thinking that this was a Star Wars show by calling it Kyber Shards, which is not just an Eberron thing. And so this time I thought I would just confuse everyone and accidentally trick some Star Trek fans into coming in, and maybe they'll stay around. So if you got here because you're a Star Trek fan, stick around. We like Star Trek. We don't play Star Trek, and this doesn't
Philip
have anything
loves Q, so yeah, we can hear about that.
Man, I was making a good impression, Eric.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome. These will usually come out on Fridays. I can't promise every Friday. Everybody's schedule is a little more weird this campaign because we is grown-ups, and that's what schedules do as you get grown up. But insofar as we're able, we will put these out on Fridays on the YouTube channel. And before we dive into the listener questions or the viewer questions that we got, and if you want to submit questions, you do it over on our Discord, which you can find links to below. So Orryn, Eric, is a vessel. What's that?
So that is a third-party D&D 5e class from a creator called Laser Llama, who is an outstanding third-party content creator. They have their own Discord if you want to check out all their stuff, but they do a lot of classes. And the Vessel was a class that... here's the deal. I was thinking about both mechanically and narratively what I wanted to play, and I landed on a warlock again. I was like, well, I just played a warlock, so I would like to do something a little different. And so the Vessel is very warlock adjacent, in that it's a half caster with some melee capabilities, yada, yada, yada. But this time, instead of having a pact, it's an entity resides within you. You share your body is a vessel for some very powerful thing. And then there's some, I don't want to get too deep into the mechanics because at third level, some really cool stuff happens that I think we're going to unveil narratively. But it's when you use the abilities that reside within you, it's a lot more obvious than a warlock using their powers. You don't look just like a caster. It's pretty obvious when you're tapping into your power. So I really like that. And once I found the subclasses, which the one that I went with is the Fallen, just narratively, it seemed really interesting and fun, as is the case with using a lot of third-party stuff. The Vessel has already been updated. There's a new version of the Vessel that has been dropped that changed a lot of things. And so one of which was you don't pick your subclass thing until third level, whereas previously it was second level. So I was like, well, I don't know how we're going to deal with that, but we'll just figure it out. So yeah, anyway, it's a fun class.
So for those of you that don't know, I'm a player in a podcast that Eric is the GM for called Eberron Renewed. Also links below. And in our first campaign, Eric let me do all sorts of weird and crazy things. And I used a third party class for a while called a Kinsei. And we just did all sorts of things. So yes, so it was very easy to say, but also very easy to say yes to this. Eric's not someone who's going to find something that is going to break the game and try to sneak it in. So there was no real worry there. We're trying that out. And that explanation probably gives you insight into a couple of things that have already happened in the story, in terms of Orryn.
Yeah.
So what made you land on a tiefling?
Well, I worked my way backwards in that I liked the idea of, and Philip was privy to this conversation because it was a conversation between me and him, but it was also a conversation internally within Eric I liked the idea of being of natural birth, like not being a bastard or anything to somebody important, but the birth being such a bad omen that they are disowned kind of thing. And so I landed on a few different things of possibly a changeling or a shifter, but tiefling just, felt kind of right for even in Eberron, where tieflings aren't like inherently like demon.
Hmm.
But even so, if two human parents have a baby and it comes out a tiefling, especially if they are the king of Breland, then that's going to be a thing. Like people are
Yeah.
going to talk it, even if it's not just, hey, you cheated on me with a tiefling dude, clearly because you just birthed a tiefling. So I liked that concept. So I kind of landed on the story and then picked the lineage that I liked the most within that framework between a changeling, a shifter, or a tiefling were the three that I really kind of toyed around with. So yeah.
Nice. So one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is um, with him being a disowned member of the royal family. You decided very early not that Orryn doesn't conceal that from people that he knows.
Mhm.
Why? What made you decide? Because the obvious story thing is this is going to be a big reveal.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting twist that you decided that Orryn's very open about it. What made you decide that?
Yeah, I think part of it was kind of what you touched on, in that normally, like the standard story, you would have that be a reveal in something that's concealed, even possibly to Orryn himself, and just I would hand it to Philip and be like, "Hey, pick a time when it makes sense to reveal this." But I like the idea of it being a chip on his shoulder and something that he's, I think, due to his upbringing and the circumstances in which he kind of bounced around, where it was like, "We're going to stick you down in the stables until we figure out what to know with you, do with you. Then we're going to send you for training." I think Orrin's smart enough to pick up on, okay, if they were going to kill me, they would have just killed me. Like
Right.
if that was an option. So obviously, I don't have to keep this a secret, because that if it was a big thing, they would have just taken care of it. And it's questionable how many people believe Orrin when he says, "I'm the son of the king of Breland."
Right.
Um, so so that also kind of leans into the piratey, like claiming to be this person of import, but it actually being true in Orrin's case. Um, but the other big thing is I just didn't want to have that. It Based on the backstory that I came up with, I knew that Orrin would know. So then the
Hmm.
question was, does he share it? And it honestly just seemed exhausting to keep that kind of secret for a long time from the other players.
Hmm.
So Orrin, where'd you come from? Well, I can't say. Or like having some big elaborate ruse. That just seemed tedious and exhausting, and just not as fun as Orrin claiming to be who he actually is, and then letting people decide whether or not they believe him. So
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So we actually had a question that I've kind of trodden on already from fellow player Mia. Mia begins. This is a Q&A show, Mia. This is just a statement, so I'm afraid this is against the rules. Mia says she's enjoying Orryn so much, but we're just going to move
thank you,
right
Mia.
past that because not a question. What made you decide to play a tiefling? We got there. But have you ever played one before, and how much of Orryn's personality is because he's a tiefling?
um, I don't think I've ever played a tiefling before.
I don't
No,
think,
yeah,
not with me at least, I don't think so.
yeah, not in a substantial game. There may have been a one shot where I was like, oh, a tiefling sounds fun.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say Orrin's personality, his personality is defined by the circumstances because he's a tiefling of how he was treated, not like his tieflingness, I guess. The way
Mhm.
that I tried to play up, once Ari became a hexblood in Kyber Shards, I tried to play up the more mischievous and playful nature because he is of the Fae now.
Mhm.
Whereas Orrin, it's more of just he's kind of an impulsive brat a little bit, and that's just because of how he was raised. So yeah.
That's pretty funny. Um, okay. So we have a handful of questions uh, referencing some of stuff from Kyber Shards. Um,
So spoilers, everyone.
so slight spoilers for that. But first of all, Emily asked of me, I noticed that no one seemed to be playing an Eberron specific race unless someone's a secret changeling or something like that. No, definitely not. Was this just a coincidence, or was it too difficult to pull off to convert the races from Tales of the Valiant? No, it's actually pretty easy to convert There's a little bit of difference because they do the lineage and heritage split, but it's pretty easy to convert anything really, because Tales of the Valiant is not very far off from D&D. In fact, mostly you could just play D&D stuff as is in Tales of the Valiant. It'd be a very maybe a very slight difference in power scaling, but not much. No, so it just turned out to be a coincidence. I made it clear to everyone if you wanted to play something specific to Eberron, we'd easily convert it. And just no one landed there. Obviously, with what people are playing, we spent some time on what does that look like in Eberron. Casey landed on her concept and wasn't sure about the species for a while. And her concept fit really well with Lorgulin, and so I sent her a piece of the article on Lorgulin from Chronicles of Eberron, and that settled her on a gnome. And then Mia settled on a gnoll very early, and so I was helping her understand what a gnoll's like in Eberron. Luckily, it's not actually that radically different from the rest of D&D as with elves or something like that. So no, it really wasn't. Gnolls we were gonna have to convert, but then Kobold Press put out a small release that was just a bunch of more heritage and lineages, and that included gnolls. So we almost had to convert something, but then didn't. So no, it was actually pretty straightforward.
A rare deviation of our normal pattern where they would have released the gnoll right after we wrapped his campaign up.
Right.
So.
So then another from Emily for me. If I'm remembering Cadric's monologue properly, all the Lazar principalities bent the knee to Arandis in the age of Colseer. It's from Cadric Shards. Was Lesh Durga among their number, or was she an outlier that Cadric didn't count by the time 1005 YK rolled around in the age of Colseer? Is she still loyal to Arandis? That's a really excellent question. I've been thinking about this like for the last few days since it was posted, and I really don't know what the answer is yet. My reason for saying that Lesh Durga might be willing to do something like that is I imagine Lesh Durga to be extremely pragmatic. And so if she did, it wouldn't be a decision she made out of, oh, well, this is the rightful ruler or something like that. It would be this opens an opportunity to me, or this buys me some time to maneuver, or resistance is futile, so I'm not going to get everybody killed. I'm going to submit until I can find an angle. And so any submission that Durga gives would tend to be, unless in some way she came to owe a debt of honor to someone. Barring that, any kind of submission from Lesh Durga is going to be calculated and is going to last as long as that calculation remains true. So the two reasons that she might, to anyone, Mirandus or otherwise, would be a calculated risk, or something happens that puts her in an honor debt to that person, in which case it might be a slightly different calculation. In the same vein, from Emily to Eric, how well do you think Orryn would get along with Ari?
I mean, at first blush, probably not well, because Ari tries to be a lot more thoughtful and he would view Orryn as very rash and lacking that quality. I imagine Orryn and Shade would get along really well, which would eventually engender Ari to Orryn. But yeah, I think that it would take a lot of warming up, and it would be based around a lot of circumstances as to whether or not Orryn and Ari would get along well. But if just passing ships in the night, absolutely not. Like, Ari would think, oh my God, this guy cannot control himself, and Orryn would view Ari very much as a stick in the mud. So yeah.
Okay. Then if you were going to build Ari as a Tales of the Valiant character, how would you build him? Would he be any different? Or would it still be Warlock? And Emily says, I'll let you decide if this is original pre-packed Ari, forgotten Prince packed Ari, forgotten Queen packed Ari, or a version of Ari who somehow gained levels as an adventurer since the end of Kyber Shards.
So I mean, yeah, Ari would still be a warlock in the way Tales of the Valiant builds their characters. They have a hexblade, don't they? Or like a melee
Yeah,
focused
the it's
subclass?
called the
Yeah.
Reaper. It's essentially
Okay.
the Hexblade. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be kind of Ari's build, both Forgotten Prince and Forgotten Queen pact, because there wasn't a huge amount of change.
Hmm.
I don't think any change really when it switched over to Arandis. I think I swapped out a couple spells to have necromantic spells that because that made sense. Um, but post pack Ari, like even I kind of built a version of post pack Ari for the epilogue just in case Philip threw an encounter at us. I had a character sheet ready, and he's a bard. He's a
Sure.
college of eloquence bard because he's a really good talker. And my one problem with that class, once you're level like 13 and higher, it doesn't matter that you can
Yeah.
take a 10 in persuasion checks. It's just when you get that at level 3, I'm like, what are they thinking from a design
Right.
standpoint? So that was Ari's build. So yeah, it would be a bard because he would try to still be able to do something when Shade and Pog came calling for like, hey, a giant plant's attacking the school or something.
Right.
Um,
It's a
so
weird
so yeah,
suggestion.
yeah. And pre-packed Ari was 11, so probably not a playable character.
Commoner.
So yeah. Uh,
Do you think that Orryn would have sworn loyalty to Arandis in the Age of Kulsir?
Orryn has a lot of deference to Lesh Durga
Hmm.
and what tends to follow her lead. Um, and I think especially rewinding the clock back to the timeline of Kyber shards, it would be even more so
Yeah.
because Orryn would still be he would be a lot younger and a lot more reliant on Lesh Durga. I think it all depends on the nature of Arandis's seizure of power.
Yeah.
Like if she comes in and kills a bunch of people, then Orryn's going to have more of a problem with that than he gets word like, "Hey, Arandis Vol is now the ruler of the western half of Corvair. She demands fealty." He'd be like, "Okay, like, sure. Is she going to take our ship? Can we stop sailing, or do we have to stop sailing? No. Okay, then whatever. Who cares?" I think that's
Right.
Orryn's attitude to the people that sit in fancy chairs and wear nice hats.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Nice. And then in the intro, Orryn's last name is listed as De Wyvern instead of Irwinarn. Is Wyvern a common last name for those cast from the Brelish royal family, or did Orryn change his name himself? For that matter, I understand that the D prefix is exclusive to the Dragonmarked houses. Which one is he affiliated with? I assume not Lyrandar, given that he can't use a wheel of wind and water.
Orryn is an impulsive brat. So Wyvern sounds like Winarn. It's very close. So he's like, I'll have that be my last name. And I think in his brain, if I go around calling myself Ear, then that might be brazen enough to get people angry at me. So I'll just do the duh. Like
Mm-hmm.
the Dragonmark houses aren't going to do anything to me if I go by De Wyvern. So yeah.
It sounds better too. I think De Wyvern sounds better than Earwyvern.
Yeah.
It's easier. It rolls off the tongue nicely. It's a good
Yeah.
piratey name.
Yeah.
Excellent. We have some questions from Josh. And I don't know if we've ever gotten questions from Josh before. And if I'm forgetting, then sorry. And if not, welcome, Josh. Josh asks, Philip, any specific inspiration for Lesh Durga's house? The description was fantastic. Thank you. Black sand because of the volcanic island? How much is Lesh Durga how much is a Lesh Durga thing versus a hobgoblin or Dakani or a principalities thing? I have modeled Durga's keep off of a Japanese style castle. I want the principalities to feel like more than just fantasy pirates. I don't want everything to feel like Pirates of the Caribbean or Tortuga or whatever like that. I definitely want some of that's there, but I don't want everything to feel like that. And I also don't want it to just be bog standard medieval castles, because people in the Lazar Principalities are from everywhere. It's the place where humans arrived from Sarlona. There's a large population of elves who came here instead of settling in Arenal. And of course, there are exiles from all over the place and runaways and people with nowhere else to go. And so I imagine that the architecture of the principalities is just wildly diverse. Maybe some principalities have a consistent style. The parties, as of the last episode, on their way to Vale, which I've given as a very Carnathy style place. Excuse me. But I would imagine that bigger principalities probably have a lot of inconsistency. As to why Durga's keep is done in a more Asian style, with courtyards and that sort of and the low ceilings and the wood panels. I honestly don't know that I have I can base it in anything specific from Eberron. I have always imagined Elvish culture to have a slightly Asian look to it because it's so very it emphasizes tradition so much, and that's a culture that I think of as emphasizing cultural traditions a lot, especially in the past. And so that value on what's come before is something I associate with my readings on Japanese and Chinese culture. And I think of that as related to the elves. And so that might be more of a Lazar thing than a hobgoblin thing, something that she adopted there. Black sand because of Volcanic Island, yes, is the answer to that. So yes, and I spent a lot of time. I appreciate you saying the description sounded good. I spent a lot of time looking at images and doing some research so that I could describe it well. In fact, enough so that the corporations that track me around the internet now think I would very much like to move to Japan and buy a historic house there. So that's what my Facebook ads are now.
Are they wrong?
Historic house. I mean, not always. Like every now and again, they'll give me, and the property prices are real low. And so every now and again, they'll give me one. I'm like, that looks really cool. I can't lie. I would live in that one. Anyway, continuing from Josh, Eric, Ellywise said that Orryn was safe on the ship with her. Does that phrasing raise any concerns about not being safe with her on land, especially coming down on the opposite sides of the elemental rights question?
There are a lot of concerns raised about Ellywise in Orryn's mind. And as soon as he thinks he's asking a question that will alleviate some of those concerns, like 3 more pop up. So no, it's very fun to play across from Casey with those 2 characters. Yeah, Orryn is concerned about the nature of Ellywise's power just because she is so enigmatic about it. And then also just baffled by the elemental rights thing. Like that's still something that he just like cannot in like a real world analog would be if somebody walked up to me and said, I think horses should vote. It's like, why? What? How? Like, I get they are majestic, beautiful creatures that deserve respect, but there's got to be a line at some point. So, yeah.
And then Josh asked, since you got the excited about question in episode 4, when I asked about excited about or worried about members of the crew, who is Orryn most worried about being on the crew?
I think that there is, I saw this question and thought about it, and I'm going to pick like the kind of, I don't know, it's a complicated, I think Sahina, just because I think that there is some latent, I mean, good old fashioned like prejudice against gnolls from the last war and like the environment he grew up in, and hearing people talk about gnolls as being these roving bands of mercenaries on the Western Front that like would attack villages. And I think probably Sina was the first one that Orryn saw in person. And so there's probably a like, oh, what? Who are you? Like, and so I think there would have been some initial like big reservations about working with her. And obviously we're picking up the campaign after all the player characters have known each other and worked together. So I think that there is a lot of that's been alleviated, but I think there is still like just that little bit of tension in the back of his mind
Mm-hmm.
because at a very young age it was hammered into his brain that gnolls were inherently dangerous and you need to be careful around them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where he's at.
Cool. Josh has some questions to throw to anyone over the next few episodes. So, any particular actor you'd think of to play your character in a live adaptation or voice in an animated one?
I like when I spent a lot of time thinking about the voice and like standing in the shower doing different voices, not only which ones I liked, but which ones I thought I could keep on
Yeah.
consistently over the course of a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years. Because there was some impulse to go like Scandinavian or Germanic, like do something like way out there. Because I burned my Southern card with Ari, and I was like, well, I can't do that again because that's just the easy one. So but once I leaned it on kind of the posh British accent, it was like first Thor movie Tom Hiddleston, like a young
Uh-huh.
Tom Hiddleston
Uh-huh.
is kind of what I think when I'm playing Orryn. So
Nice. Very good. Uh, if your character had been or was in Stormreach during the events of Kyber Shards, which of the major NPCs would your character most get along with?
Greg, man, like Oren and Greg. No, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a cop out answer, but probably Malcolm. Like they're
Mm.
both like ship people.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm's a smuggler, Oren's a pirate. I think it would have been really easy for them to get along really well. I think, you know, Oren's impulse control issues might have exasperated Malcolm a little bit, but I think that Malcolm works with enough pirates to like understand that that's just part of the profession. But probably Malcolm would be the Kyber Shard's major NPC that Oren would have gotten along with. Oren would have had no reason to have been in Stormreach during the events of Kyber Shards because he has had up to this point in his life zero agency on where he's lived.
Right.
So if he was on a ship with Lesturga and they came through Stormreach, he might have been there for a spell, but he was
Yeah.
not there for a long duration of time.
What was Orin doing during the last war? The follow-up is any particular side you were backing. Orin obviously didn't get a
Yeah.
lot of agency about that either.
Yeah. Oren, during the last war, well, he was born during the last war, and then was sent down to the stables for a bit, the royal stables, um, and then after a particularly nasty incident involving one of the ghost tigers, he got sent to the Citadel to start training to be as good of service to the crown as fitting his position, which means a disposable asset. And once he started uh, displaying enough weaponized incompetence to show that he wasn't going to go about that path well, then he got shipped off to the Lazar Principalities. So
I
I
like
wouldn't
that
say,
phrase.
yeah. um, while he wasn't necessarily backing Breland, he was like, well, I mean, this is home, so I hope my home stays here. And then it
Yeah.
wasn't his home anymore. And honestly, at this point, in terms of the Five Nations, he really like at this point in the campaign does not care. Like
Mm-hmm.
his family has made it clear how important he is, and I think there is some nuance because I'm playing a relatively young-ish character. Oren's a bit older than Ari was, but Oren has a lot more baggage related to his family than Ari did. Because Ari's parents died when he was young, so he could romanticize his parents a lot more. Um, but I think there is some nuance in how uh, Borinel and the rest of the royal family actually feels about Oren and treats him versus how Oren views how he was treated. So I think there
Yeah.
is some nuance there. But right now, Oren's like, I'm a pirate. Screw those guys. I'm going to do what I want. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that gives me an inkling of the next question, but how does your character feel about the houses
Uh,
and dragon marks in general?
I think Oren's thoughts on the house is he views them at face value. Like
Mm-hmm.
they serve the functions that they serve. and he doesn't think about it too much deeper than that. I think probably he is so unconcerned about the houses and what they're up to that he would go to like a House Fjarlin like entertainment house and just be like, yeah, this is a cool hangout spot. Oh, we want to talk business? Yeah, sure. Let's talk business here. What, like, they're just entertainers. Who cares? Um, and I do think that the one Dragon Mark house that Orryn would have the biggest problem with would be House Galanda. I think anytime he sees a golden dragon inn like moving in, he's like, like he's a real big shop local type of guy.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
That tracks. There are some NPC questions, which I'll get to when I do an NPC Q&A. So I'll save those. Laura asks, if Orryn were at Greymalkin, what class would he teach? If Orryn had to teach, what would he teach?
Boy. Etiquette? Is that a class?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it would probably be either that or, I mean, he gained a lot of skills in the Citadel while he was trying to act like he was an idiot. He was actually learning. And so I think maybe something to do with that, like espionage, like it might be a little like you could probably do a
he teaches more downstairs than upstairs.
Yeah. So that would probably be more what he would be interested in teaching, although his skill set would probably be much more in the etiquette realm and like here's how to carry yourself in the world, to speech and debate coach.
There you go. Speech and debate coach. Love it. And of the students that we introduced last year, which student would he like the most and which would he get along with best?
Probably Pip, I would say, like just because Pip seems like he's eager, and Orryn doesn't really. I think he would find Kara. Orryn doesn't have much time for people who are too cool for school, like, or just have that general attitude. It's like, come on, life's short, just have a good time, like. And so I think that would be the student that he would probably like find the most exasperating. But yeah, Pip he would really like.
And then Emily has a couple last questions. One, have I picked the big BBEG, the big bad evil guy for the campaign? How long does it usually take me to pick that? That's a really good question. In Kyber Shards, I kind of had the notion of an apocalypse-like character, but wasn't really sure whether that's where it would go. I kind of introduced that. It was completely possible for Dane to become the big bad guy of the campaign. Tommel was nowhere on my radar at the beginning, so a lot of that was kind of just introducing things, and then what the players latched onto is what I started emphasizing, and that's when it started to form my mind. So no is the answer to the question. There are adversaries already. There are the rival houses of the other islands around Nine Bay that serve as the main rivals to the Coral Fang Principality right now. And so those are there and set in place. But larger scale, there's a lot of things you can do in the Lazar Principalities. There are you can pull in Sarlona stuff and get into the Dreaming Dark. There's a Fae Spire here with a really creepy group of Fae. There's, of course, Lazar politics with the larger principalities and Prince Ryger. There's the Bloodsail Principality up there. There's whatever the Ghost in the Gauntlet is. So yeah, there's a lot of things that one can do in the Lazar Principalities, which is one of the fun things about it. So it'll probably be the same. Is I'll introduce a lot of possible threads and kind of see what the players start tugging at most readily, and lean into that. That's usually what I do. Especially, when have I usually picked? Probably by the time we're into tier 2, I have a good idea of what the players are are into. So by the time we've gotten past level 5 and into level 6, 7, I've got a good idea of what the players are really into and what they're really interested in, and that's when I'll start to kind of lean into that harder and build more on that. But I've got a lot of villainous plots that are happening, and we'll just see which one the players and their characters decide they really are most interested in digging into. And then Emily asks if I haven't. This was recently. If we hadn't started recording yet, congratulations, we hadn't. In your Eberron, how commonly is the word overlord used, not referring to the overlords? That's a fair point. So the overlords, if you're not well versed in Eberron, are basically the chief fiendish forces that threaten Eberron and are, maybe people know of the overlords, but mostly you wouldn't necessarily be able to name one unless you're studied in the lore of the Silver Flame or something like that. But I think probably because overlords is like a colloquial term. There's a technical term in Abyssal that I can't remember, and there's the Rakshasa Rajas, which I think is the scholarly term for them. Since overlords is kind of, I think, a catch-all colloquial term for them, it's probably not a term that's exclusively used to reference them. There's probably nothing ominous to most people of referring to the idea of overlord or overlordship or something like that. So, just because Leshturga talked about expanding her overlordship, she's like almost certainly not an overlord. It's just, that's what would make you think that ever? You are the crazy one. Yeah. Yes. No, I think it's probably in the same way that we use the word God to refer to things other than actual deities. Even I believe in God. I still use lowercase God in daily conversation for other things. So it's yeah, I would say it's just a part of the language, and people use it lowercase and uppercase.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer there. So that concludes our questions. So thank you all so much for those of you who submitted so many great questions for our very first one for this campaign. Our next one, which maybe will be next week, we'll see, will be, wait, yeah, maybe. I was going to, for a moment I thought, wait, it's Christmas almost. We'll probably be another player introduction. We'll probably do those until we've gotten through all of them and then get into a regular rotation. But in the meantime, you can find links to all the things that we do and to our social media and merch store down in the description below. New episodes of Blades and Banners come out on Mondays, and you can find the ship's log on YouTube on Fridays. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.